This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
I am a member of the Triratna Buddhist Order, which you probably all know. And Triratna is my spiritual home and the spiritual home of the order members in the room. This is the community I practice with. Usually there's more of them. But having explored other forms, this has proven to be the one that's the best fit. So I want to first acknowledge with respect the people who are the elders of our tradition. We have our chairperson here today. I bow to my preceptors, my friends, and to my teacher, again, Sangharakshita, whose understanding of the three jewels is what I honour. And so I want to remember with gratitude the founding of this order, 51, is that correct? 51 years ago? And I want to also look ahead to what we might become in the future. But I confess that I have a fear for Triratna. History is littered with spiritual movements that have not survived their teacher, at least not in the same form with which it began. And so I fear that without his insights, Triratna could lose its revolutionary edge. And I fear that it could actually degrade into something really austere and almost secular. I think it could become very academic, and we could even become spiritually anemic. So to circumvent that, I think we need to do something quite radical. I think we need to reassess and turn again and again and again to what lies at the heart, not of our institutions, but of that active, dynamic and transformative concept and practice of going for refuge. I think we need to return to that. So this book is actually entitled Bell, Book and Candle, which comes not from the quirky 1958 film, starring James Stewart and Kim Novak and Jack Lemmon and Elsa Lancaster. And this is a film where a witch casts love spells on her young beau, who's actually James Stewart, and she uses a bell, book and a candle to try and an amazingly cute cat, I should say, to cast spells. Instead, it comes from one of the most unlikely sources, and I have checked if we have any ex-Catholics in the room. It comes from the Catholic ritual of excommunication. Now, this ritual has actually been adapted by Wiccan and New Age movements, or elements of it have been adapted as a means of doing magical rites. Now, the original ceremony, I'm not a bishop, so it won't actually have any effect, what I'm about to do. It usually had 12 priests who would hold a candle. The bishop would ring a bell. He would close the Bible, which would symbolise cutting off your access to God. And then he and the other priests would actually throw their candles to the ground. And the light of hope and heaven would be extinguished. And they would say this, but obviously in Latin, "We exclude him," because it's always about men, of course, "we exclude him from the bosom of our Holy Mother, the Church in heaven and earth. We declare him excommunicated and anathematized." So it's not really a positive thing, as you could probably imagine. So it would cast a person out from the community, render their immortal soul damned for eternity, and leave them to fend for themselves in an unforgiving and harsh world. That's charity for you. So part of me likes this idea of being excommunicated. I'm generally on the side of the excommunicated and rebels. They stand up for what they believe in amidst conformity. So they don't fit into views and beliefs that inhibit the growth of the individual. I like that. However, a substantial part of me is terrified by the idea of having to do it all alone. Not having support, having to test the limits of my own capabilities. And I think it takes a lot of courage and commitment and preparedness to be unpopular. So being ordained, as myself is and the other order members in the room, is a lot like being excommunicated. So when we're ordained, there's two aspects to this process within Triratna. The first part is the private ordination. This is that path of personal commitment, a bit like the maverick, where you direct yourself wholeheartedly towards the three jewels, and you promise that even if you were the last Buddhist alive, you'd keep going. So you're completely separate, imagining yourself, I will keep going even though I'm alone. Now I find that, and I found that at the time, profoundly moving. So I will practice for the good of the Dharma and the good of the world, even if I was completely alone. So it's like excommunicating yourself from the world. It's saying, I'm done with the world of pain, there's something better. So I've rung the bell to announce my intentions to the world, I've closed the book of everyday life, boom, and I've extinguished the light of a mundane life. Now the second part of this is, of course, the public ordination, where we realise that we do this in a community, it's not alone. We're lucky enough that there's still other Buddhists around. This is the part where you have to say, yes, well, it's not just about being a lone wolf. It's not just about, me. I have to learn to play nice with others. I find this part the hardest part. So there's actually a collective responsibility to being ordained in Triratna. There's a private commitment, there's a public commitment. Both of these are together, the outer and the inner. So for the rest of this talk, I'm actually going to explore what Triratna makes its primal act, which is inside both of these rituals, the inner and the outer. This concept of going for refuge, this practice of going for refuge to the three jewels. Now these are the three items of the title. I'm sort of circumventing, I'm kind of inverting the bell, book and candle of Catholicism into something positive. So the bell is the Sangha, and I'm going to spend the most time on that in the talk. The book is the Dharma, and the candle is the Buddha. Now I'm going to make some challenges along the way, and as I said earlier to you, the challenges are really me talking to myself in the mirror, and there may be resonances for you, there may not be. And I'm also going to make a wish for each one, for the bell, the book, the candle, the Sangha, the Dharma and the Buddha. And there's be a little bit of theatre too, because I also teach drama, so there'll be a little bit of theatre. Don't worry, it's not audience participation. But before we move into this idea of going for refuge to the three jewels, all these three items that I'm talking about, to go somewhere you need to leave something. You have to really know where you're leaving before you go. So I want to talk a little bit about how you become a Buddhist and why you might become a Buddhist. I'm assuming that we are Buddhists all here, or maybe we're not. And I think this concept is the very first really unique and powerful concept that Sangharakshita gave us in Triratna. It's his first stroke of genius. What it actually means to be a Buddhist today. Now the Buddha taught many things, but I think the essence of what he taught is best communicated to a monk whose name was Anuruddha, not Aniruddha, Anuruddha. In a sutta from the Sutta Nipata, he says, both formerly and now, it is only suffering that I describe and the cessation of suffering. He teaches suffering and the end of suffering. Now, on one side, this is a recognition of the basic human condition. He invites us not to run away from discomfort, experience it, understand that it arises on certain conditions, and change those conditions to the best of your ability. So in becoming a Buddhist, we're actually not asked to run away. We're not asked to disappear into a fantasy realm. We have to face our relationship to suffering, to discomfort. So a Buddhist is ostensibly one who follows what the Buddha taught to do this, put it into practice and emulate his inside experience. So, how do you become Buddhist? You can't be born Buddhist. That's something else Sangharakshita was very clear on when he founded the order. It's a matter of activity, not ethnicity. Now, there are many people born in Christian countries who've never been baptised or received communion, yet they call themselves Christian on a census. This kind of Christianity is a name, a flag, it's almost a kind of star sign. And the same applies to many people born in Buddhist countries. Sangharakshita says in his little PDF called Going for Refuge, "How can you be born Buddhist?" He says, "Do you issue from your mother's womb reciting Buddhang Saranang Gacchami?" A born Buddhist is a contradiction in terms. You can become a Buddhist only consciously and deliberately as a result of personal choice. You cannot possibly be born a Buddhist. The Buddha himself criticised Brahmins of his day, so high caste people, for thinking that one could be born a Brahmin. You were a Brahmin, he insisted, only to the extent that you acted like one. So Sangharakshita believed that to be a Buddhist, one must make that free choice to practice Buddhism. It might sound really obvious, but I encounter a number of people in my working life who are Buddhist because they say they are, and there's not a lot of evidence to back that up based on activity. You know, Buddhism must actually be practiced. It shouldn't be talked about cleverly or worn as a special mode of dress or as a sign of status. So to become a Buddhist, there are two main parts, again, internal and external, like with the ordination ceremony for us. Internally, I suppose we might have questions about reality. We might have issues around our own pain. We might be really curious about phenomena and about how the world is. We might be drawn to how the Dharma is represented in different cultures. And this can lead to you making a public affirmation. The second, you might go to what's called a taking the refuge ceremony, or a triple gem ceremony as it's often called. In fact, my first becoming a Buddha ceremony was a triple gem ceremony, which Manichita attended, if I recall. Do you remember how long it was? I felt it was like 3 hours long. Anyway, so here in Triratna, within our community, we call it becoming a mitra ceremony, becoming a friend. Yeah. So another thing that Triratna does with regard to this ceremony is to taking the refuges and really looking at what that means, because it's a misnomer. In the refuges, we chant Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. And Gacchami doesn't mean to take. It's not something you take on. Gacchami means to go, to move towards, to have a sense of trajectory and momentum towards. So to take the refuges is like taking a blessing or receiving a blessing or adding something to one's life, I think. Whereas the idea of going is more active, less passive. In many parts of the traditional Buddhist world, taking the refuges or the triple gem ceremony is something you do or is recited to you when you go to a temple. Monks and nuns say it, you listen. To go is not to go through the motions. To go is not to do it mechanically. To go is to apply the three jewels, not just to be inspired by them. This, I think, really is what Triratna does differently to the rest of the Buddhist world. We're not interested in just repeating the words in the hopes they will convey some kind of mystical power or give us a sign of belonging to a group. I think people who practice Triratna very deeply really want to know the meaning of the three jewels and go and go and go again, again, again. How they can embody the significance of the three jewels and move closer to becoming them. So, going for refuge is to say, because the refuge is a safe place, right? Is to say, this will protect me. This will keep me safe. This will teach me what is needed to survive, revive, and thrive. Okay? So that, I think, is an essential aspect of what Triratna is and why it's special. It's not just about wanting to go through the motions. It's asking us to go more deeply. So I'm going to start with the first one now. I'm going to start with the bell. So I'm going to be a bit associative about the bell, and the bell is, in this case, in the space of this talk, it's a symbol of Sangha. A bell calls us back in meditation, right? It calls us to a shrine room when you're on retreat. It calls us to gather together, to bring ourselves together, both internally, when we hear it. Time for the second stage, the mindfulness of breathing. Brings us together in unity. The bell does not ring by itself. It requires an act to make it sound. It is dependent upon conditions, the shape, the quality of the materials, the skill of the ringer, the strength of the strike. It can be shocking, gentle, melancholy, distant. It can also be profound, and it can be jarring. Listen to this one. Where is it ringing? Sorry, that wasn't a rhetorical question, that was an actual question. Where is it ringing?
Our senses.
Your senses. Say more?
So I'm hearing it within myself.
But it's here, in front of you, isn't it?
But where I experience it is within me.
Correct. Yeah. When you ring, when this is rung, vibrations move through the air. They're directed by your ear, the outside part of your ear. It bounces from your ear, which changes the sound, into the ear canal. It bounces on the membranes, the small bones, which are covered in crystals. Those sounds are transported to the brain, interpreted, evaluated, and spatial awareness locates it being outside you. So you're actually projected outwards. You know that it's coming from here. But you're quite right, it's actually inside you. Is it the same sound for everybody then? No. No one can hear anyone else's sound. Not one of you can hear what the other person has heard. It's impossible. Now you might say, if any of you musically trained? Anyone got a music training background? Okay. Because I was hoping there would be someone here like Clifford. Yeah, because, an F is an F and an A is an A, that's what they are. Not that I think he would say it in that tone because he's kinder than that. But it's actually physically impossible. So there's a broad range of, what is the boundary of an A that everyone kind of communally agrees on. But you have to agree on that. Yeah. I think Sangha is an inner experience too. It's not an external thing. The bell is not the ringing. Now, in the rest of the Buddhist world, Sangha is defined as being a community of monks and nuns. Now again, another radical thing in Triratna is that we don't do that here. We are neither monastic or lay. We are not one thing or the other. We are not the bell or the ringing. Sangha for us in Triratna is not a role, a position, or a place in a hierarchy. We are both the bell ringers and the hearers simultaneously. So in the wider Buddhist world, and I actually work in a wider Buddhist world, I have quite for some years, we are really confusing to other people and other Buddhists, particularly those who don the robe and command respect by their resemblance to the Buddha. Now this resemblance, one hopes, does actually go deeper than the cloth, and I actually know this to be true because I have a number of monk friends who are very sincere, and they do inspire me, and I know that their practice is committed, and I regard them as friends. But if you have spent time with monastics, you'll know that looking like the Buddha doesn't mean you are one. Yeah. For example, and I need to be careful here, I know of a community, a Buddhist monastic community in the southwest of Sydney. Members of that community who were ordained have been taken to the Supreme Court over the last few years over domestic violence abuse between the monks. In fact, video evidence of physical abuse was some of the material presented to the court. Now, little of this was known to the many, many families who came weekly to bow down before the monks and sit at the feet, the same feet which had been used to kick other members of their community in the head. But people who live in glass Buddhist centres shouldn't throw stones. Members of our own order and even our founder are not immune to unskillful acts that cause harm to others. Our history, sparkling as it is with treasure, has signs of moral corrosion. And I say this not to blame or criticise, but to be honest and real. We must see our own shadows. For in doing so you become authentic rather than just some kind of Shangri-La or some kind of cloud cuckoo land of spiritual escape. To set yourself apart and holding it as a sign of status is like saying the bell is the ringing. You know, I am the Sangha. I look like this, I am this, the form is the truth, that the order itself is the Sangha. And I don't believe that. I believe that Sangha is an inner experience of resonance. Resonance between individuals generated by trust and active deep listening. We don't all have to agree. We don't have to be the same. Because quite frankly, a chord, a musical chord, is not three versions of the same note. It's actually different notes, or a chord are three notes or more, that when they are played in unison, they are pleasing to hear. So we need to play our own notes, make our own kind of music, as Mama Cass sang. But we have to listen at the same time for that inner resonance of a chord with other people. So our order expresses this kind of ringing in a vast array of different notes, but I think they're all generally in the same key. We have Dharma centres, we've been going for a long time, like the London Buddhist Centre. We have massive outdoor festivals full of music and dance and colour, still Buddhist, called Buddha Field. We have Eco-Dharma, it's in Spain, isn't it, Eco-Dharma, where people live on the land with as minimal impact as possible. And then we have centres of ordination training like Padmaloka and Taraloka and Triratna Loka, and I'm sure there's another one I'm thinking of. Adhisthana, of course, yeah. And we have charitable trusts, retreat centres, businesses, publishing arms, web hosting. But gathering a bunch of people who call themselves Buddhists does not make it a Sangha. Even doing Buddhist things like meditating, bowing, studying, meeting for dinner at a local vegan restaurant doesn't make you more or less Buddhist. These can be, and I stress can be, only cultural aspects of going for refuge. They are established norms of what we do. Culture. So Machida just said, not as established as she'd like. Sangharakshita defines 4 levels of going for refuge, and one of them is the cultural going for refuge, sometimes called provisional or even ethnic. level of going for refuge. This is the level where one does Buddhistic things, but they have no real spiritual significance or no real impact. And I think sometimes we tend to think of cultural Buddhists as being ones who belong to different cultural groups or ethnic groups. Oh, that's what the Chinese do, or that's what the Thai do, or that's what the Tibetans do. But I think we need to hold that mirror up a little bit closely and realise that we have our own cultural norms too. So one can do a lot of noble and skillful Buddhist things for complicated reasons. And I'm speaking really about my own life right now. Hopefully there's some resonance. One can do it to be special, to fit in, to find a tribe, to serve, to be liked, to join an order, to gain status. And this next one's true. To get back at a God that you don't believe in. I know someone that was their motivation. Sometimes we do it to justify or give a weighty dimension to our own political or social views. Now, in some cases, and only you can tell this, and you need to do this yourself, is have an honest and unrelenting reflection. To what extent have you adopted Buddhist ways of acting because you want to hold a moral high ground? You want to win against those whose views are clearly wrong? You want to be right? Or you want to defeat those who hold contrary views to you? Greed, hatred and delusion are sneaky buggers. They are unrelenting in their quest to keep us spinning on the wheel. So we need to look within and see to what extent we are motivated by greed. So, for example, you might actually want a specific outcome or result in your life, in the world, and you're unhappy if it's not been achieved. Now that could be craving meditation experience or getting your way in meetings. Hatred. Now, to what extent do we dismiss and ignore those we dislike and reserve compassion only for the victims rather than seeing that even the perpetrators suffer? I find that particularly in the political domain. I see people who are friends of mine who stand up for the victims of abuse, as one should, but then they cast abuse on those who've actually caused harm to others. And I don't see that as being particularly Buddhist. And then there's delusion. We believe, maybe, that a high-impact, long-lasting change can only be achieved with a loud collective voice. The Buddha asks us to contact suffering, to understand greed, hatred and delusion and give them up. The Buddha asks us to be awakened, not just to be woke. Now, in the Dhammapada, the Buddha actually has a response to this. He says of trying to win, of having the highest status, or of being the most powerful in any given situation or argument, he says, "Come, view this world. See it as an ornate, festive carriage. See how fools are entranced by their visions. Yet for the wise there is no attachment. Better than ruling the whole world. Better than going to heaven. Better than lordship over the universe is an irreversible commitment to the way." So here's my first wish, and then I'll move on. I have a wish for the Sydney Buddhist Centre and for the wider Triratna Sangha. I wish that we will learn not to mistake the bell for the ringing, the form for the truth, the institutions for Buddhism. And to make this come true, we must learn to listen more acutely for the resonance between each individual and within our own selves. And to trust that even if the note is different from others, it just might be in the same key. Okay, time for the book. How are we feeling? Ready for me to move on? Okay. So this book here is actually one of my favourite books by Sangharakshita. It's the Guide to the Buddhist Path. It's a little red book these days. This is the old version of it. Yeah. You may see why I've selected that as the Dharma text here. So a book allows us to be transported to new places without an airfare. We can go to new times that we couldn't possibly visit, and we can gain wisdom that was hard won by others that we admire. Books can be old friends, regular travelling companions, and even treasures. Books can be a way that we can understand the world through another person's eyes, and to journey to places we might be too afraid to visit. And they're not risk-free. If anyone who's read a book that's changed their mind will know, because books will change you. Good ones will. So if we return to the ceremony of excommunication, the holy book, the Bible, is closed, cutting people off from the higher teachings. So if we invert that, if we go for refuge to the Dharma books, we realise we don't have one, we have thousands. You know, some belief systems have one central text. We have just thousands and thousands of them, and then commentaries on those. Our scriptural pedigree is impressive in Triratna. We study the early texts of the Pali Canon. We study those gloriously over-the-top Mahayana Sutras. We have Vajrayana Tantras. We listen to Dharma talks about Metta, Abhidharma, the White Lotus Sutra, the Wheel of Becoming, and, you know, good old-fashioned ethics. It's pretty diverse. Many other Buddhist movements don't have that variety available to them. In fact, there are some Buddhist movements that are based around solely one text and one text alone. And it's quite overwhelming to think of the range and complexity of Buddhist texts and teachings that are available. If you Google Buddhist training or Buddhist teachings, you know, it's a rabbit hole, an internet rabbit hole ahead of you. Sangharakshita was very clear when he formed the order and the way in which we practice that everything really needs to be about emancipation, a vision of a truth and the path to get there. So here's a little selection of the titles, if you like, that we have in Triratna that are available to us as a practice. I've got 5 that I'll just briefly mention. The first one is that we have the system of practice. And it has 5 main branches that involve study, meditation, and just daily practice. The 5 parts in that system are, firstly, we bring together and unite the different parts of ourselves. We get to know who we really are. 2, we get to build an expansive emotional repertoire. That sense of emotional resilience that comes. Thirdly, we let go. We let go of that which is unhelpful to us. We learn how to do that. There are specific practices to teach us how to do that. Fourthly, we learn to emulate and be inspired by figures of history and of myth who can lift us and shape us in better ways. And lastly, we learn to be present with equanimity and without judgment to what arises and passes away. I mean, that's enough, really. If you look at that, if you can do that stuff, that's really enough. Secondly, we have a strong ethical guidelines and practices to work with. The 5 precepts, the 10 precepts, that transform the way we speak, the way we act, and the way we think. That will be enough, really. We have something called a refuge tree, which, in my view, I'd like to see more done with, but that's just my personal preference. This is a tree, it looks like a tree, but it's a lineage, if you will, or a visual list, representation of figures who've influenced and shaped the way Sangharakshita sees or saw Dharma practice and shapes the nature of our very order. On it you'll find monks, lay people, mythical kind of archetypal figures, Zen practitioners, Tibetans, Indians, Chinese. So diverse, culturally diverse, diverse practices. And they're a window into a wider Buddhist world. And I've always found prostrating to that to be very profound experience. Fourthly, we have devotion. We're not just a secular mindfulness training organisation, we have devotion and ritual. So we conduct pujas to evoke the will to enlightenment. And we have Dharma study. We sit around, we read and we talk and we share. So they're just the broad chapter titles of what we do in Triratna. It's really diverse. You don't see this in a lot of other Buddhist movements. But what is the real Dharma? Similar to the idea that the bell is not the ringing, books and words are not the Dharma. Dharma is a way of transforming thought, speech, livelihood, action, emotion, to be driven less by craving, ill will and confusion, to being content, compassionate and aware. Now, despite there being these thousands of teachings, or this list of five that I've shared, we can fill our bookshelves and our opinions with lots and lots of Buddhist stuff. But it's pivotal if we actually want to be Buddhist rather than just culturally Buddhistic. We need to find the teaching that actually leads you to change. Now, the teaching that changes you may not be cool. It may not be sexy or tantric or exciting or have the best props. It might be really dull and unspecial to have to do it every day. But it is really important because that practice may be the one that helps you let go. Sangharakshita said it best in his book, The Yogi's Joy, when he said, I found this a bit of a slap actually, because I'm a bit of a collector. He said, "You don't need a lot of initiations or shelves groaning with Dharma books and Sanskrit dictionaries to make your practice effective. Just reflect on what it really means to go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha, and do your best to live in accordance with that." So here's my second wish. My wish for all who practice in Triratna and here is that they find the teaching that they need that allows you to release habits, craving, and other deep-seated issues. And when you find that teaching, may you explore it deeply, not just for a while, but until it is no longer potent, and then release that teaching too. It may not be the teaching from the latest Windhorse book, or the words from the most recent visitor from Triratna's mothership in the UK, or even what your dear spiritual friends find useful and keep talking about. It may not be popular or cool or esoteric, or, gasp, even one taught by Sangharakshita. Find a teaching that resonates with our community's values, however, particularly if it challenges you profoundly, and go hard. Kindly hard, not brutal hard. That's my wish. Okay. Doing well for time. Last part of the ritual. Manichita, would you light the candle for me? Thank you. Oh, so there was audience participation after all. Sorry. We light a candle. To him who is the light, we offer light. When I was doing my research for this talk, something I found out about here, it kind of blew my mind about candles. Candles bring light into darkness. Bless you. They are portable micro-suns that bring safety from what lurks in the dark places. They consume themselves as they burn. That's an interesting symbol in itself. They burn bright and they burn down. They enlighten a room. Recent discoveries have demonstrated that the centre of the flame in a candle are diamond nanoparticles that exist for nanoseconds. And in fact, all forms of carbon exist in a candle flame. All the 4 forms of carbon molecules. They produce minute diamonds that exist for the most minute fragments of time. Now, one of the most oft-repeated verses in the early Buddhist texts says this about the Buddha, usually after he's given a teaching and someone has had their mind blown. Master Gautama has made the Dharma clear in so many ways, as though he were turning upright what has been overthrown, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. So a Buddha is one who is awake, with their eyes fully open. They see things as they truly are. They are not blind to the truth. One candle can ignite many, many candles. So too, if you were to trace back through time all those sincere spiritual friends you've had who inspired you, that would actually span neighbourhoods, cities, states, countries, continents, empires, languages, nationalities and cultures, all back to one man sitting under a tree. His insight directly led to you sitting here now, like a candle lighting a candle, lighting a candle, lighting a candle, lighting a candle. And in pujas, we offer candles to the shrine, and this is one of the things that I love to do, because each time you offer a light to a Buddha in a darkened room, each person's offering makes the Buddha easier to see. More candles, the Buddha becomes easy to see, not just for you, but for everybody. But candles, and indeed lights in general, cast shadows when an object blocks the radiance. So when things obscure the light, its effects are diminished. Now there are many things that obscure our vision of the Buddha and his enlightenment. Now I've spoken about them earlier: greed, hatred and delusion. Those persistent habits of mind that cling tenaciously to existence, and they work to stop you changing. So to walk a Buddhist path, to go for refuge, you really need to remove the blockages and become aware of the conditions and work with what we can change. But the obscurations can be subtle and really devious. One of the most devious ways that greed, hatred and delusion work on us is the view we have of the Buddha himself, because it reveals a lot about who we are. So here are some common views that outline how people regard the Buddha. Actually, I found this in a talk that Sangharakshita gave in 1994, I think it was, called The Disappearing Buddha. It's a great talk. It's a cracker of a talk. So here are the views that many people have about the Buddha. And you may have resonance with one or more of them. They're very revealing about who you are and how you see the Dharma life. So the first one is that the Buddha was a wise and insightful human being. So if you see the Buddha as a man, albeit a wise and compassionate one, your Dharma practice can become solidly grounded in the human realm, this realm of pain, psychology, and maybe working at relieving social ills in the human domain. So if he was this, if he's this to you, you might disregard anything that speaks of anything sort of spiritual or slightly supernatural as being a later kind of accretion. It's come from somewhere else. It's not real Buddhism. This view sees the Buddha as a being, a historical figure in time, set in time. In having this view, you could possibly cut yourself off from allegory and from poetry and the non-rational aspects. Dharma practice could become for you just a science of the mind or a philosophy. Now the shadow aspect of this here really is seeing that the Buddha was just a good guy, a perfect person, the best kind of human. This is the kind of Buddha inside. This is the view that says, well, he was a man or a woman and he did this and I can do it too. Done. There's nothing wrong with that view, by the way. It's a useful view. You might see him as a wise and insightful godlike figure. This is the second view you might have. If you see him as a transcendent being who has cast off connection to the world, he becomes somewhat ethereal and beyond your experience and somehow distant or away. He's beyond time in this particular view. You might be drawn more to the fantastical elements, maybe not so interested in practical teachings around ethics. You might prefer ritual, devotion and the arts. You might feel that he has an influence that you need to draw on to summon and bring down to our level because, he's on high and we're lower. You may even subtly, and maybe not even be fully aware, think of yourself as unworthy or lesser in some way. I personally spent a lot of time of my life in this view. Every time I would pound myself to the ground in front of a Buddha shrine, it was only to keep myself lower and to place him up higher. This aspect, the shadow aspect of this, is seeing the Buddha as a distant cosmic power on whom we can call. This is the Buddha not within but outside of us. So the first sees the Buddha as being inside, human, like me. The second view sees the Buddha as being, separate, outside. The third one is a kind of line drawn between the two. He was a wise and insightful human who became a godlike figure. So this view bridges the two, and it's actually quite a useful model, but it has limited scope. So here is a man who blossomed or transformed into something other than a man. He moves from within time, within the historical, to being something archetypal, something beyond the human realm and beyond time. This is a valuable narrative for our spiritual journey, but it has actually more in common with New Age movements, or even with Hindu movements, that see the self growing and improving over time. Better, until it reaches godhood. But this is actually a path of personal development. It's just about me getting better, me getting bigger, me getting more me. Yeah. So this is the Buddha evolved into a better me. The fourth view is he was neither human or God, but something else entirely. This is the Buddha as a transcendent, mysterious figure that you can't pin down and you can't draw a line between. This is a mystery because it's a conundrum, because he's not one or the other. It transcends a dualism. And it keeps your mind in a space of going, you can't know, you can't hold, you can't attach. Some of us are more comfortable with the Buddha being a good guy who had a good philosophy because we can deal with that, we can cope with that. Some of us want to escape from the world into a view of the Buddha as being a godlike figure that we can worship. Some of us like the idea that we can grow into being a godlike figure we can worship. But we're still got the boundaries and the definitions. There is no mystery. I think this is, in that particular talk, I think the Buddha is, Sangharakshita is saying that we need to not grasp and hold to the Buddha in the same way that you can't grasp or hold a candle flame. We'll come back to the flame, because flames are a mystery. They're not matter. They're not solid. They're not liquid or gas. But they actually behave in ways similar to both. Actually, fire isn't matter at all. This is fascinating, it's a visible, tangible side effect of matter changing from one form to another. It's not a thing. It's a side effect of transformation. The Buddha that we see is the side effect of transformation. into something transcendent that is above a linear duality. Here's the funny thing as well. What do we call the seat that the Buddha sits on? The Vajrasana, which means?
Diamond throne.
Diamond throne. What's at the base of every candle flame? Diamonds. So the Buddha is not a thing, a person, a being, but a symbol of transition itself. A symbol of our transition and all people's potential transition. Not from human to God, as in this idea of the Buddha evolving into one better version of himself, but to a state that transcends the duality of both. It's not on a linear domain, it's actually above, almost like the top point of a triangle or a pyramid. He may have acted like a human or a god, but he was neither. He was an enlightened being, a new class. We have that potential too, but we need to maybe change the views that we have around what the Buddha was or is. So in conclusion, at 12 o'clock, Triratna was founded 51 years ago, though it was not the name it was born with, rather like the order members in this room. We and it have become something altogether different and yet the same. Sangharakshita wanted to invigorate the sometimes empty words and scholarly interest of Buddhists and create a vibrant, active, reflective and spiritually viable movement of people committed to the Three Jewels. Not just committed to saying the Three Jewels' names on certain days in the presence of certain people wearing certain things. The ritual of excommunication I've evoked here is to ask us to cut ourselves off from old habits, from unhelpful views and the obscurations that block us from moving from suffering towards freedom. Going for refuge to the Three Jewels is the way in which we do that. Sangharakshita says this again and again and again and again. So, if we listen deeply, with kindly, forgiving ears, we may hear the resonance of Sangha despite the different notes. If we commit to practicing what we need to do, not what we want to do, we may experience Dharma. If we remove what's blocking the view, we can be more open and receptive to the light of the Buddha. And here is my final wish for you all. So my final wish is that you might come to see your aspiration as something larger than psychology, philosophy, sociology and ecology. May your light shine as a beacon to help others, to help them find their way in the dark. May you, in the end, reach nirvana, which, by the way, means, incidentally, the great blowing out, the great extinguishing. And that is the end of my talk.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you